listening to Your Secret is Safe with Me, non-judgmental talk about infidelity with Dr. Marie Murphy. If you're looking for new perspectives on complicated relationship issues, you've come to the right place.
Days go by, they're crawling by.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Marie Murphy. I'm a relationship coach, and I specialize in helping people who are engaging in something they think counts as infidelity to deal with their feelings, clarify what they want, and make decisions about what they're going to do. If you are in the midst of an infidelity situation and you would like my help sorting it out, let's work together. You can schedule an introductory coaching session with me through my website, mariemurphyphd.com. I offer shame-free, blame-free, non-judgmental coaching via Zoom, which means we can work together no matter where you're located. All right, today we're going to start talking about infidelity in the holidays because somehow or another here in the United States, Thanksgiving is right around the corner. I don't know how that happened. And that pretty much launches us into what many people here think of as the holiday season, or at least it's a period of time that includes Thanksgiving and Hanukkah and Christmas and New Year's. Now, let me be clear that I know there are other holidays within that time period, and I know there are other holiday seasons throughout the year, depending on which holidays you celebrate and where you're located. And although today I'm going to be speaking with a certain set of holidays as my frame of reference, what I'm going to say may be applicable to any holiday season. And that's going to be true for the subsequent podcast episodes because I'm going to continue talking about holidays and infidelity for the next several weeks. The holidays, as you may have noticed, can be a time of intense highs and lows, even if you don't have anything to do with infidelity in your life. So many of us have really strong beliefs and therefore really strong feelings about the holidays. Maybe you love the holidays. Maybe you have all of these great memories of the holidays from when you were little. Maybe you have all of these holiday traditions that you really enjoy. Maybe you love seeing your kids or other family members enjoy the holidays. Maybe it's something else. Maybe the experience of the holidays is a big positive for you overall. Or maybe you hate the holidays. Maybe you hate the obligations or the consumerism or spending time with your extended family or having to travel or having to participate in rituals that don't mean anything to you. Or maybe you feel left out of the holidays. Maybe you don't have family or friends you typically celebrate the holidays with or spend the holiday time frame with. And you feel left out or abandoned when everybody else is celebrating without you. Or maybe you don't have strong feelings about the holidays, but other people in your life do. And maybe those people share their opinions or feelings about the holidays with you. Maybe your spouse and your kids love the holidays and they want to see this. They want you to love the holidays too. And they tell you this. Maybe your parents or your extended family members have expectations about spending time together during the holidays or having meals together or engaging in certain religious traditions together or other rituals together. Maybe you have people in your life who think the holidays are ridiculous and they insist on telling you this and explaining exactly why they think the way they do at every chance they get or whatever. The point I'm trying to make here is that there are a lot of ways we can experience the holidays. And since we collectively assign a lot of significance to the holidays, we may, as individuals, either assign a lot of significance to the holidays ourselves, positive or negative or otherwise, or we may deal with people in our lives who assign a lot of significance to the holidays. Now, this is just a great occasion to point out something that's always important, and that is that we humans are meaning-making creatures. We have these sophisticated brains, and one of the things we do with them is make up stories about the world around us. And that might sound kind of simplistic or patronizing. But what I mean is, humans have the ability to create and share meanings about the world we live in. And we have been doing this for many thousands of years now. And so, collectively and individually, we have done things like assign value to certain things and experiences. We've decided how to categorize things, and we've agreed upon criteria to use to distinguish between categories. We've decided that some things are important. We've decided that some things are good and some things are bad. We've come up with some explanations for the mysteries of human existence, or at least we have devised some strategies for exploring or explaining these mysteries. And if you have any background in the social sciences, you may recognize that what I'm talking about is the social construction of reality. And that holds that, the meanings that we share are the products of human interaction and negotiation. And of course, the meanings that we share change over time, but sometimes they are remarkably stable. Now, if you've never heard about the social construction of reality before, that's okay. The point for now is just that we are continuously making sense of our experiences of life, individually and collectively. And it is these meanings that we create that determine our experiences of life. It's not the material conditions of our existence that have inherent meaning or that give our life meaning, but we may think that they do, however. As I've said before on the podcast, we tend to think that our circumstances or the facts of our existence determine our experience. We may think that our circumstances are inherently meaningful. We may think that our circumstances cause us to feel whatever feelings we feel or compel us to act in particular ways. But that is not how it works. It is our thoughts about our circumstances or our thoughts about the facts of our lives that generate our feelings. And then our feelings give us the capacity to take action in particular ways. And this is all part of the think, feel, act cycle. And we're not going to talk about that whole thing right now. The really important point for us today is just that the facts of our lives are not what make us feel however we feel or behave in whatever ways we behave. Our feelings and our actions are the product of our thinking or of our beliefs or of our perceptions, our stories or our narratives. I'm using these words pretty interchangeably today. There is a famous sociological maxim that holds that when we think things are real, they are real in their consequences. I'll say that again. When we think things are real, they are real in their consequences. Put differently, when we think things are true, we behave as if they are true. And notice that this doesn't have anything to do with whether or not something is objectively real or objectively true. And what this means for us, long story short, as individuals who can control some things in our lives, but not all things in our lives, is that it's really important to get super clear on what we think is real and on what we believe is true. Put a little differently, it is really important for us to get clear on what we are thinking. It is important to get clear on what our story is about any given situation in our lives or about our lives as a whole. It's important to get clear on the meanings we assign to our life circumstances. So, like I said before, humans are meaning-making creatures. And unless we have trained our minds to slow down, we have thoughts whizzing through our minds practically all day, every day, and maybe even when we're trying to sleep. We are constantly perceiving the world around us. We're constantly making sense of things through thinking about what we experience. We are constantly assigning meaning to every aspect of our lives. And we may be scarcely aware that this is going on. We may be kind of aware that we have this ongoing stream of internal commentary running through our minds, but we may not recognize that. It's not a given. And even if we do, we may just assume that this ongoing stream of internal dialogue is a neutral, factual assessment of what's going on out there in the world around us. But that is not exactly the case. Folks who have studied the brain and observed the mind at work will tell us that the stuff we're thinking usually is not neutral or factual, or for that matter, even helpful. It's just our set of meanings that we are applying to our experiences from one moment to the next. Now, to be clear, this is not a bad thing to do. This is just what humans do. Our brains have evolved to do this, to assess and evaluate the world around us and make sense of the world around us, so to speak, or to make nonsense out of the world around us, as may be the case. So what happens sometimes when I talk to people about what their brains are doing, their minds as these meaning-making machines that don't always tell us the neutral truth, sometimes people think that they have to police their minds and never think a thought that isn't factually accurate again. But that isn't the point. And moreover, I don't think it would be possible to do that. And I don't think it would be helpful to try to do that. The point is to be aware of what our minds are doing. The point is to be aware that our sophisticated mental capacities have allowed us to collectively create human society as we know it today. And this capacity to give meaning to our lives isn't bad. The meanings we give our lives can be a source of richness and satisfaction, a source of shared meaning and individual meaning. But on the other hand, meaning, isn't necessarily a source of richness or satisfaction. The meanings we give to our lives and to specific experiences within our lives can also create a lot of suffering for us. So the opportunity here is to get really clear on what meanings we're making, or what stories we're telling ourselves, or what stories we're buying into, or what we believe to be true. And then after we're aware of what we're thinking and able to see whether or not it is the only possible thing we could be thinking about our circumstances, we have the opportunity to change our beliefs and change our story and change our thinking so that we may suffer less and experience more of what we want to in life. That's kind of like, maybe not the ultimate point, but a ultimate point. But before we can do this, before we can attempt to change anything, we have to be able to get clear on where we are in any given moment. We have to be able to identify what we are currently thinking. And we have to be able to distinguish between the facts of our situation and our stories about that situation, or our thoughts about that situation. And in a way, this is a very simple thing to do. In fact, it's so simple that we often think that we already know and we're already doing this and we already know what's fact and what's story. But it isn't necessarily as easy as that. And moreover, many of us aren't in the habit of doing this rigorously. We might think we are, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we are. However, the good news is that this is something that we can get into the habit of doing. And when we do, it can be life-changing. In fact, it's pretty much bound to be life-changing. So to do this, let's start by clarifying what we mean by facts. When I talk about facts or circumstances, I am talking about occurrences that any neutral observer would assess in the same way if they were to witness them. So for instance, I'll say that again. Why don't I say that again? When I talk about facts or circumstances, I'm talking about occurrences that any neutral observer would assess in the same way if they were to witness them. So for instance, the statement, "my spouse is really disrespectful," is not a fact. It's not a neutral circumstance. Why not? Well, what does disrespectful mean? What does it mean to be disrespectful? What does it mean to behave in a disrespectful way? Different people are going to have different definitions of that. And that isn't a problem. It just means that disrespectful is not a fact. Now, maybe something happens that led you to believe your spouse is disrespectful. I don't know where I come up with these examples, but let's just say that you have a job. You have a meeting coming up that you consider really important. And you've told your spouse this. You've said, "Honey, I have a meeting coming up that's really important. And I need quiet time in the evenings to prepare for my important meeting." Now, let's say that you said those exact words to your spouse. And then every evening since you told your spouse that, they have invited 5 or 6 friends over to practice singing operatic singing or whatever. I'm not, not like that familiar with the terminology here. So my apologies if I'm getting this horribly wrong. So your spouse has these friends over and they're using microphones and practicing operatic singing. And this is all happening in the room right next to where you are sitting and trying to prepare for your work meeting. Now, if this is your situation, there are some facts here. It's a fact that you told your spouse you need quiet time in the evenings. It's a fact that your spouse has invited people over to sing every night since you told them that. It's a fact that they're using microphones when they sing. And if we had the right equipment, maybe we could measure the volume of their singing in decibels. All of that would be factual. But none of those facts automatically mean that your spouse is disrespectful. The thing about facts or circumstances is that they are neutral until we give them meaning. It is not inherently true that because your spouse has people over to sing, that they're disrespectful or that they're disrespecting you. We may think it is obviously true that our spouse is being disrespectful if they have their friends over to sing every night after you've told them that you have a big meeting coming up and you need quiet time in the evenings to prepare for that meeting. And it's also possible that everyone else we know would agree with that assessment, but that does not make that assessment objectively true. Other people beyond your friend circle might assess these facts in a totally different way. So we need to consider this a thought, this my spouse is disrespectful thing. We need to consider that to be a thought or a belief rather than a fact. My spouse had 5 friends over to our home last night and they sang as a fact. My spouse is disrespectful is what we think about that fact. Now, that does not mean that it isn't legitimate for you to think they were being disrespectful, but we aren't getting into that right now. Our agenda is not to evaluate whether or not our thoughts are legitimate or reasonable or unreasonable or whatever. That's not the point here. Our agenda for right now is to recognize that a lot of the things that we believe to be absolutely true are not absolutely true. The point is to recognize that some things that we think of as facts are not actually facts. Now, sometimes doing this, making these distinctions between circumstance and thought or fact and belief is pretty easy, but sometimes it isn't. We may really believe that it's true that our spouse is disrespectful if they have friends over to sing after we've told them we need to work in the evenings. And when we get really attached to our beliefs about what is true, we may not see any alternatives. And it may seem really threatening to our ego or our sense of self, or even to our literal existence to change our beliefs about what is true. Letting go of ideas we are really used to believing in as true can be as scary as death. And it may even be fair to say that letting go of our beliefs may be a kind of death, not a biological death. That's not what I mean, but the death of a version of ourselves. And that can be fucking terrifying, even if it isn't a literal physical death. And even if we don't really want to continue believing whatever it is that we currently believe to be true. Crazy. Many of us would rather be right than be free, but that's a whole other story. Anyway, let's take a look at this and using an example. And I'm going to start with an example that has to do with the holidays, but doesn't have anything to do with infidelity. We may believe that if we don't go to our family's Thanksgiving dinner, our mother will be really mad at us. And we may believe that this is a certainty. And we may believe that we have all kinds of evidence that proves this is a certainty. Maybe our mother told us that she is looking forward to seeing us at the family Thanksgiving dinner. Maybe she told us how happy she is that everyone is going to be together this year for Thanksgiving. Maybe she's told us how awful she felt last year when the family couldn't get together for Thanksgiving because of COVID. Maybe there was one time years ago when you opted out of the family Thanksgiving dinner and she said something to you about that. Maybe she told you that she was disappointed that you didn't come. Now, all of these things may have happened. These occurrences might be verifiable facts. But even if they are, they do not mean that it is a fact that your mother will be really mad at you if you don't come to Thanksgiving dinner. For one thing, this is something that hasn't happened yet. It's a future possibility, but since it hasn't occurred, it is not a fact. And there's no way for us to know for sure what will happen in the future. So it is most definitely a thought that your mother will be really mad at you if you don't come to Thanksgiving dinner. It's not a verifiable truth. But if you believe that it is true or will certainly become true, it will definitely impact how you feel and then how you behave. So, in other words, if you think this is real, it's going to be real in its consequences. But we're not going to talk about the possible consequences of that belief right now. We'll do that another time. Right now, I'm just underscoring the distinction between thoughts and circumstances or beliefs and facts. Okay, here's another example. Let's say we're married and we're having an affair. And by that, I mean we're having some sort of relationship with someone who isn't our spouse. It's important to point out that affair is not a neutral circumstance. It's not a fact. There's no one absolute definition of what having an affair is or means. But that's another thing. I don't want to go down that vortex right now. So let's say that we're doing this thing. We're married to someone and we're also in a relationship with someone else, and we're going to call that having an affair. Let's say that we're pretty sure that we want to end our marriage and pursue our relationship with our affair partner, but we don't want to do anything about this until after the new year because we're sure that if we raise the possibility of divorce with our spouse during the holidays, our spouse will be devastated and it will ruin the holidays. And everyone who knows us will forever think of us as the person who gave their spouse a divorce for Christmas or Hanukkah or whatever. So we think that we just have to get through the holidays before we can make any decisions about our relationship. And we may believe that we have to keep up appearances with our spouse during the holidays, just in case we decide that we don't want a divorce after all. So how much of this is true? How much of this is fact? Well, it may be true that you're married. It may be true that you are also engaging in a romantic or a sexual relationship or emotional, whatever. You're having this experience with someone else that is outside of the bounds of the agreement you have with your spouse, right? But is it a fact that if you raise the possibility of divorce during the holidays, your spouse will be devastated? No. For one thing, it hasn't happened yet. For another thing, what does it mean to be devastated? Is there a universal, absolute definition of what devastated means? No. Now, you might protest and say, well, my spouse would tell me they were emotionally devastated if I told them I wanted a divorce during the holidays. And it's true that that could happen. They could say those words. They might say, this is devastating, or I feel devastated. But if they say those things, then the fact is that they made that statement or those statements. That's not the same thing as it being objectively true that you did something that devastated them. Now, you might say to me, well, okay, I hear what you're saying, but I still don't want to ask my spouse for a divorce until after January 15th or January 31st or whatever. And if that's a plan you feel good about, that's fine with me. Pointing out that it is not a fact that you would devastate your spouse if you asked for a divorce sometime between Thanksgiving and New Year's does not somehow mean that you should ask your spouse for a divorce during this time period. That isn't the point here either. The point is that all circumstances are neutral until we give them meaning, and more than one thing can be true about any given circumstance. And it's the meaning we give to our circumstances or our beliefs about the facts of our lives that create our experiences of our lives. It's never the facts or the circumstances themselves that dictate how we feel or how we respond. So it behooves us to get in the habit of noticing what we are thinking and noticing the meanings we assign to things and noticing the stories we tell ourselves. And sometimes just doing this can bring us a lot of freedom and relief. For instance, if I allow myself to recognize that it is not, in fact, a certainty that my mother will be mad if I don't go to the family Thanksgiving dinner, I might feel better without even doing anything differently. And thus I might behave differently. If I dare to believe that if I dare to believe that asking my spouse for a divorce sometime in the month of December does not necessarily mean I'm going to devastate them, I may feel less pressure or less guilt. I might still feel sad and nervous about talking to my spouse about a divorce, but feeling less pressure and guilt may bring me a lot of relief. And that might enable me to think more clearly about what I want to do about my situation. So, with this in mind, your opportunity is to go about your business and life and start practicing distinguishing between facts or circumstances and your thoughts and beliefs about those circumstances. Sometimes this will be really easy to do. And other times you will notice that you are so convinced that what you believe is true that it's pretty hard to draw the line between fact and thought. Whether it seems difficult or easy, though, the point is just to begin to build awareness. Start to notice what your meaning-making machine is up to. Start to observe the beliefs that your mind entertains. Engaging in this practice is a really big deal in and of itself. And it is also the foundation upon which other practices, which help us make the changes in our lives that we want to make, are built. Okay. In the next few episodes, I promise I will talk more specifically about infidelity in the holidays. We'll talk about some scenarios and the possible struggles you might be experiencing around the holidays if you're in a particular sort of infidelity situation. So stay tuned for that. But this is an important preface to all of those conversations. Getting clear on our stories versus the facts of our lives gives us superpowers. So begin to practice this, see what it does for your thinking and experiences of the holidays. And of course, if you would like my help dealing with the specifics of your infidelity situation and getting clear on what your story about your infidelity situation is, let's work together. I offer confidential, non-judgmental coaching via Zoom so we can work together no matter where you're located. To schedule an introductory coaching session with me, you can go to my website, mariemurphyphd.com. All right, folks, that's it for today. As I always do, I'm going to request that if you've enjoyed what you've heard, I'd love it if you would head on over to iTunes to rate and review the show. Really appreciate that. And I appreciate you for listening. So I'll talk to you next week. Bye for now.
Thanks for listening to Your Secret is Safe with Me with Dr. Marie Murphy. Make sure to click subscribe to get updates on our latest episodes.